After defeating Clayman, Rimuru officially becomes a Demon Lord. Meanwhile, Demon Lord Leon and Valentine decide to leave. Once they have left, Demon Lord Guy treats the remaining Demon Lords with a special meal. While eating, Milim tries to drink, but Rimuru immediately takes the drink away from her. After that, Rimuru finally decides to return to Tempest. As soon as he reaches Tempest, he receives a grand welcome from his citizens. He also spots Diablo. Needless to say, Rimuru is surprised to see Diablo there. After that, while eating pudding, Rimuru notices that Diablo is offering his pudding to Veldora. Rimuru immediately realizes that Veldora has been transferring all information related to the Walpurgis to Diablo. Rimuru then questions Diablo about his mission in Falmouth Kingdom. In response, Diablo reveals that things are going smoothly. Diablo recalls how he restored the bodies of the King of Falmouth, Raisin, and the Archbishop. Diablo begins restoring their bodies one by one. First, he restores the Archbishop guy. After that, Raisin states that Diablo's real name is Noir, and he is one of the 7 primordial demons. He also points out that what's more terrifying is that Diablo acknowledges someone as his master. After taking everything into account, Raisin requests Diablo to accept him as Diablo's lowest-ranked servant. Raisin also begs Diablo to spare their king. Diablo agrees to take Raisin as his servant, but Diablo gives him some conditions. Firstly, they should never disrespect Rimuru, and secondly, if Diablo senses any malice from them, they will not be the only ones to die. Everyone in the Falmouth Kingdom will vanish. With no other choice, the king also swears to cooperate in any way Diablo desires. By the way, Diablo's unique skill, Tempter, prevents his servants from betraying him. Thus, the king of Falmouth becomes Diablo's servant. After that, Eom asks Diablo whether the hostages are alive or not. Diablo assures him that they are alive. By the way, this incident also made Eom and others realize that they should never mess with Diablo. After reaching Falmouth, Diablo presents the king in his tragic state. Raisin informs them about the defeat of the Falmouth army. Raisin also presents the made-up story that Diablo came up with. According to Raisin's story, the battle between the monsters and the Falmouth army awakened the sleeping dragon Veldora. As a result, Veldora went on a rampage and wiped out their army. However, Demon Lord Rimuru somehow managed to calm Veldora down. Thanks to Rimuru, they managed to escape. The Archbishop also confirms that whatever Raisin told them is true. Eom also steps in to convince the nobles of Falmouth. He implies that Rimuru wishes to coexist with humans. But one of the nobles arrogantly declares that they will use Eom to convey their demands to Tempest. In response, Eom tells them that Rimuru is very angry right now. Then, that idiotic noble starts disrespecting Rimuru. Meanwhile, Diablo starts to get angry. Raisin tries to stop him, but he again starts talking arrogantly. Thus, Raisin uses magic to freeze him. Well, he knows that things will turn ugly if Diablo gets angry. After some back and forth, the nobles of Falmouth finally decide to accept their offer. Thus, Diablo makes his entry. Diablo then proceeds to restore the king. Diablo then delivers a message from Rimuru. He gives them 3 options. The first one is that the king will abdicate the throne and compensate Tempest. The second option is that Falmouth will surrender to Tempest and become a vassal state. The third option is that the war will continue. By the way, Diablo gives them 1 week to select an option. As Diablo is leaving, one of the nobles tries to complain about the options. But when they try to complain again, he also makes it clear that what they want means nothing to Rimuru. During a Harlequin Alliance meeting, Kigali implies that she has lost connection with Clayman. Thus, she concludes that Clayman is dead. Meanwhile, Yuki blames himself for taking the Demon Lords too lightly. At the same time, Laplace calls Clayman stupid and weak. Laplace implies that he tried to warn Clayman, but Clayman got carried away and died. As a result, Footman gets angry and tries to attack Laplace. However, both Kigali and Yuki stop them. Yuki implies that they lost Clayman's base, forces, treasure, etc. Meanwhile, Tyr questions how they lost everything Clayman owned. Kigali then informs them that Clayman's forces faced a one-sided beatdown from a small group sent by Rimuru. Needless to say, they couldn't believe that a small group from Tempest took out Clayman's forces and captured his base. By the way, Yuki thinks he is powerful enough to take on the Demon Lords. In reality, the only thing he is good at is scheming behind the scenes. Thus, Yuki decides to keep a low profile for the time being. In the meantime, he also decides to give Rimuru a little payback. Well, Yuki wants to conquer the world. Sorry to break it to you, but it's never going to happen. Lewis informs Hinata about Roy's death. Meanwhile, Hinata states that Roy wasn't weak and that Roy was more than powerful enough to be a demon lord. She also concludes that the intruder was more powerful than a demon lord. Yet, Roy lost to a so-called demon lord seed. Anyway, Lewis also informs Hinata that Veldora has been revived, and that Tempest is peaceful. By the way, they still don't know that Rimuru has evolved into a true demon lord. Lewis also questions whether Rimuru will survive Walpurgis or not. By the way, Yuki encouraged Hinata to eliminate Rimuru, although she finally realized that Yuki was trying to manipulate her. After a while, Luminous returns and learns about the death of Roy. It goes without saying that the loss of a close subordinate leaves Luminous in a state of sorrow. Luminous then informs everyone that Veldora has been revived, and a new demon lord named Rimuru is born. Hinata then arrogantly declares that she wants to defeat Veldora for Luminous. By the way, only a selected few can defeat a true dragon in Tensura. Hinata might be one of the worst characters in Tensura, but she tells hilarious jokes once in a while. Bro, even one of the most powerful demon lords can't defeat Veldora, let alone Luminous. This girl lives in her own fantasy. But Luminous gives her a reality check and tells her she is no match for Veldora. Luminous also tells her that she doesn't want to lose her too. Luminous then implies that she doesn't want to make Demon Lord Rimuru and Veldora their enemies. Luminous probably thinks of establishing relationships with Tempest. Luminous also asks if Rimuru would bear a grudge against Hinata. Seriously, a little? You literally tried to end him without giving him a chance to explain. But then Luminous states that Rimuru is not stupid enough to make them his enemies. It would have been quite satisfying if Rimuru had sent Diablo to teach Hinata a lesson. But Rimuru is too soft. Rimuru learns that Hakuro and Geld are investigating Clayman's base. After that, Benimaru informs Rimuru that Gabiru will be returning soon. Since Milim destroyed the capital of Eurazania, Rimuru promised to shelter some of Eurazania's citizens in Tempest. A few days later, Diablo comes back with the stellar coins that Falmouth has provided as a form of reparation. By the way, Diablo also made the king's brother, Edward, take the throne. After stepping down and becoming a viscount, the current king would move to the countryside. If anything happens, then Eom and others will be able to protect the king. Both Rimuru and Diablo speculate that after becoming the king, Edward might try to eliminate his brother, so that they don't have to pay for the war's reparations to Tempest. This might also lead to a civil war. Although Diablo asks for permission to fight, Rimuru promptly denies his request. Well, if Diablo fights, he might end up destroying the Falmouth kingdom in the blink of an eye. Rimuru also decides to send a recorded message to the Western Holy Church using the Archbishop. After that, Albus and Sophia finally arrive at Tempest. They also bring the refugees from Eurazania. After that, Gabiru also comes back and greets Rimuru. During a meeting, Rimuru announces that it has been decided that he will rule over the entire Jura forest. Meanwhile, everyone goes silent after Rimuru's declaration. Well, the Dryads used to control a portion of the forest, and they were the ones to acknowledge Rimuru as their ruler. However, Rimuru declaring the whole Jura forest as his domain would certainly create some issues. After that, Rimuru decides to hold a big festival in Tempest. A meeting regarding the birth of a new demon lord and Veldora's resurrection takes place between the 10 great saints. Lytus informs Hinata that while spying on Tempest, she found the city rather human-friendly. She also confirms that Demon Lord Rimuru indeed wishes to coexist with humans. She also informs Hinata that she didn't feel Veldora's presence in Tempest. Sar also gives reports about the current situation in Falmouth and how the new king, Edward, is preparing an army. Meanwhile, Hinata suspects that everything is probably going according to Rimuru's plan. Meanwhile, Hinata also regrets not listening to Rimuru during their last encounter. Hinata then mentions that she has called the Archbishop to learn more about what happened on the battlefield. Meanwhile, some of them even doubt Veldora's resurrection. Well, Veldora didn't go on a rampage after resurrection, and Jura Tempest is peaceful. In response, Hinata decides to deliver a message from their lord, Luminous. Then, Hinata declares that they will not fight against Demon Lord Rimuru. Both Grigori and Sar immediately oppose this decision. Sar then implies that as one of the 10 great sages, he is supposed to be as strong as the demon lords. I don't know whether these guys are too arrogant or they are a bunch of idiots. They think of demon lords as if they are some small fries. Grigori also agrees with Sar, but rest assured, by the end of this arc, Grigori will have PTSD and Sar will be bullied by a certain demon. Hinata further adds that Rimuru wishes to coexist with humans. Therefore, they will not take any meaningless action. She also believes that Rimuru can be trusted. She then suggests talking things out with Rimuru. She also implies that she is ready to apologize if necessary. One of the celestial sages tells the archbishop to show the message Rimuru sent. Thus, he presents the message that Rimuru had sent. Some of the sages even volunteer to deal with Demon Lord Rimuru, but surprisingly, Sar implies it would be wise to accept Rimuru's demands and have a duel. Meanwhile, Hinata finds it strange that Rimuru sent such a short message. What's more strange is how the celestial sages knew about Rimuru's message. In reality, the celestial sages are conspiring against Hinata and Rimuru. For context, the celestial sages had changed the message sent by Rimuru to initiate a fight. Well, the celestial sages are jealous of Hinata's achievements and want to get rid of her to retain their positions, just like they did in the past with Cardinal Adelman. By the way, they will also eliminate the archbishop to erase the evidence. This is the exact moment when the celestial sages not only went against Luminous's orders, but also made an enemy of Demon Lord Rimuru. In case you didn't get it, you will understand soon enough. Hinata realizes that the celestial sages are probably leading her to a trap. Nonetheless, Hinata still decides to go to Tempest and face Rimuru. The celestial sages also provide Hinata with a so-called Dragon Buster. They suggest that Hinata will be able to deal with Veldora if she uses this sword. Thus, Hinata departs to face Demon Lord Rimuru. However, she still believes that she might be able to reason with Rimuru. Hinata sets off to face Rimuru. Meanwhile, Rimuru learns that Hinata is marching towards Tempest, and 4 paladins are also following her. Rimuru also learns that Hinata is carrying a sword, suggesting she might be heading to Tempest to fight him. Needless to say, Rimuru is confused. Well, it is quite obvious that despite Rimuru clearly sending a message for peace, he was met with aggression. Then, Diablo reports to Rimuru that the archbishop is dead. He further adds that it is most likely that the archbishop was eliminated. Furthermore, Diablo also informs Rimuru that someone is spreading rumors that Diablo was the one who eliminated the archbishop. Immediately after learning about Hinata's movements, Rimuru decides to hold a meeting.
Ah, shit. Here we go again.
Despite all the hurdles, Rimuru encourages Diablo to continue his plan in Falmouth and clear his name. Meanwhile, Shuna calls Adelman to explain everything related to the 10 great sages and celestial sages. Thus, Adalman reveals everything he knows. He also expresses displeasure over the fact that he was sent to death by the Luminaries. As reinforcements for Eom, Benimaru sends Gobta and Hakuro. Meanwhile, Rimuru also assigns the task of handling King Edward and his army to Diablo. After that, Rimuru learns that 100 mounted knights are also heading towards Tempest. As Rimuru is thinking of taking on Hinata, Veldora speaks up. Rimuru wonders if Hinata wants to talk things out, to which Raphael also agrees. In other words, Raphael suggests that there is a high chance that Hinata is coming to Tempest to reconcile. Meanwhile, Shion suggests assigning Team Reborn against the 100 mounted knights. Rimuru also decides to use Benimaru, Shion, and Sue against the remaining 4 sages. Then, Sophia and Albis also decide to join the battle. Rimuru implies that there might be multiple masterminds working behind the scenes. It turns out that Damrata, who is a part of an underground group named Cerberus, based in the Eastern Empire, is the mastermind. He was the one to encourage the Falmouth invasion on Tempest. He also fed Hinata wrong information to make her eliminate Rimuru. By the way, Cerberus was founded by none other than Yuki. On top of that, Damrata has been conspiring with the Rosso family to eliminate both Rimuru and Hinata. During a meeting, Damrata decides to deal with the demon conspiring within the Falmouth kingdom. By the way, Damrata still doesn't know that Diablo is the Black Primordial. Meanwhile, Glenda, who is one of the 10 great sages, is also working with the Rosso family to eliminate Hinata. Damrata questions what would happen if Hinata ends up defeating Demon Lord Rimuru, but Granbel Rosso assures him that Demon Lord Rimuru is not like other Demon Lords. In other words, according to him, Hinata is no match for Rimuru. He also implies that they will have to deal with Rimuru sooner or later. Hinata and others make their way to Tempest. Meanwhile, the Celestial Sages feed Leonard with lies to manipulate him. They imply that Hinata is conspiring with Demon Lord Valentine. They also inform Leonard that she is now trying to make connections with Demon Lord Rimuru. They manage to convince Leonard that Demon Lord Rimuru might be controlling Hinata. As a result, Leonard heads to Tempest to fight Rimuru. In reality, the main goal of the Celestial Sages is to make Hinata and Rimuru fight to death. For context, if Leonard starts a fight with Tempest, then Rimuru will think that Hinata is coming for a fight, and there would be no room for negotiations. Then, Leonard decides to siege an entire town in Tempest, but the force of Tempest intercepts them. Thus, the fight between Tempest and the Great Sages begins. Meanwhile, Hinata immediately senses Leonard on the battlefield. Then she receives a message from Nicholas. Nicholas informs her that three sages are secretly participating in the Falmouth Civil War. Meanwhile, Rimuru's subordinates are able to overwhelm the army of knights. Needless to say, they are stunned to see how easily the force of Tempest is able to deal with their crusaders. Then, Hinata spots Rimuru on the battlefield. As Rimuru confronts Hinata, Shion also decides to deal with Leonard and Gerald. As soon as Shion arrives on the scene, Leonard immediately starts sweating after witnessing the kind of aura Shion is emitting. Shion gives them two options. Despite this, Leonard decides to fight Shion. He orders his subordinates to deploy a holy field. Both Leonard and Gerald start to believe they can defeat Shion. Thus, all of them launch Holy Cannon on Shion. Holy Cannon! Needless to say, Leonard is speechless. Shion then tries to intimidate them and make them surrender. Surprisingly, Shion tries to negotiate. Well, Rimuru ordered everyone to avoid eliminating any of the sages. Shion then tries a different approach. She implies that she wants to prove the gap in their strength. But just as she is explaining, Gerald interrupts her. As a result, Gerald loses one of his ears. Thus, Shion tells the sages to hit her with their most powerful attack, and if she can withstand the attack, they will have to surrender. Gerald happily accepts her proposal. Meanwhile, Leonard begins to suspect that something is wrong. He also tries to stop Gerald, but eventually, they decide to launch their most powerful attack on Shion. However, she easily evades their most powerful attack. Leonard, in shock, admits defeat, but Gerald still arrogantly declares they will win as long as they have the holy field. Leonard tries to stop him again, but Gerald starts acting like a certified loser. Leonard immediately realizes that something is wrong with Gerald. Meanwhile, Shion decides to break their holy barrier. Needless to say, everyone is speechless. Thus, with no other choice, they decide to surrender. Rimuru questions Hinata if she got his message and if fighting is her answer. To which Hinata tries to answer, but Rimuru interrupts her, stating that he will only listen to her once she orders her force to retreat. But then Arno interrupts their conversation and refuses to withdraw their force. This prompts Benimaru to take on Arno. Albus and Sophia decide to take on Fritz and Bacchus. Sawe also takes on Lytus. After that, Rimuru and Hinata finally start their fight. Hinata tries to use her skill, Usurper, on Rimuru, but Rimuru blocks her analysis.
つまり君はルミナス様と同じ高みに至ったということなのね。
Hinata goes all out from the beginning. Thus, Rimuru prepares to take on Hinata. As Rimuru and Hinata clash, Hinata realizes that Rimuru has grown too much in a short period of time. As Rimuru barely manages to avoid any direct hits, Raphael reveals that a direct hit wouldn't be lethal, but Rimuru would lose a large amount of energy. As Raphael informs Rimuru that Hinata is trying to launch an attack, Rimuru immediately asks Raphael for help. Thus, Raphael decides to use Predict Future Attacks. As a result, Rimuru flawlessly dodges Hinata's attacks. Hinata immediately realizes the change in Rimuru's movements. Meanwhile, Rimuru's subordinates return after defeating their respective counterparts. Hinata realizes that they have already lost.
次で終わりにしましょう。私とあなたの戦いを。
Hinata warns Rimuru about her next attack. Well, Hinata will hit Rimuru with her most powerful attack, and if he can withstand the attack, Hinata will admit defeat. During their conversation, Rimuru learns that apparently he was the one to ask for a duel with Hinata. In reality, Rimuru sent this message. Well, Rimuru asked for peace and negotiation.
メルトスラッシュ。防御不能、回避不能。アルティメットスキルベルゼビュートを犠牲にして相殺する策を進言します。
Thus, Rimuru successfully defeats Hinata. As they start to reconcile, the Luminaries launch a surprise attack on Rimuru. Damrata decides to take care of Diablo, but then he implies that famous mage Rosin is serving Diablo. He further adds that if that demon is powerful enough to defeat Rosin, then he is no ordinary archdemon. He also speculates that Diablo might be an ancient demon, in other words, a primordial. Thus, with no other choice, Damrata decides to get out of Falmouth immediately. Well, Damrata knows that if he fights Diablo, his death would be inevitable. Meanwhile, King Edward believes he has already won. Well, since he has 3 battle sages with him. On top of that, Damrata also provided him with some demon hunters to take care of Diablo. Little does he know, Diablo is no ordinary demon.
Are you sure about that?
Confident in his victory, he decides to take care of the former king and Eom. Thus, he commands his army to launch an attack on them. But Sar decides to send Grigori with Edward's army. Well, he believes that Grigori will be able to take care of the demon in case he encounters him. Then, Diablo spots King Edward having lunch with Sar and Glenda. By the way, Edward had also invited some reporters from different nations. As soon as Diablo arrives on the scene, Edward tries to play dumb, but Diablo warns him and advises him to reconcile with Eom.
そうすれば知らずに済む恐怖を味わうこともないでしょう。
But Edward refuses. He then shows the footage where the Archbishop is being eliminated. Then, Diablo puts up a barrier to protect the reporters. By the way, Glenda had provided him with the footage. He then accuses Diablo of eliminating the Archbishop. Edward implies that Diablo tried to threaten the Archbishop, but the Archbishop managed to overcome his fear of Diablo.
私への恐怖をただの人間が克服したと。なかなかに面白い冗談です。もういい。もう黙れ。
Thus, Diablo decides to put them to the test. Diablo implies that if even one person present there is able to overcome their fear of him, he will admit defeat.
私は今まで一度も敗北したことはありません。
King Edward orders the demon hunters to eliminate Diablo.
恐怖を克服だと笑わせるな!
They then imply that defeating a demon like Diablo is a simple task for them. As they chain up Diablo, Diablo taunts them by telling them to give him a signal when they are ready. The leader of the demon hunters learns that Diablo let himself be captured and didn't even bother to resist.
もちろんそうですよ。 せっかく努力してくれているのですから。
メスよサンダーボルト。
The demon hunters believe they destroyed Diablo's physical body, and that without a physical body, he will be powerless. Meanwhile, King Edward also believes that the demon hunters have already defeated Diablo.
貧弱。あまりにも貧弱ですね。
But to their surprise, Diablo is unscathed. Diablo calls their attack a letdown.
バケモノめ。
Thus, Diablo begins his test. He starts releasing his Demon Lord Haki. After that, only 3 of them managed to withstand Diablo's Demon Lord Haki, the leader, Sar, and Glenda. The leader still believes he will be able to defeat Diablo with the help of Sar and Glenda. Diablo then commends them for withstanding his Demon Lord Haki, but the leader dismisses Diablo's statement and calls Diablo a liar. He implies that only Demon Lord class individuals can use Demon Lord Haki, and a demon's highest evolution is only Archdemon. But what Diablo said next made him tremble with fear. Diablo clarifies that it is possible for them to evolve beyond mere Archdemon by fulfilling certain conditions. As an example, Diablo brings up Guy, who evolved into a demon peer. Diablo also addresses him by his name. Diablo then tells him that becoming a demon lord is a simple task.
限界値まで力を蓄えてから2000年以上年を重ねるだけで済む。
Diablo also brings up Blanc, or the White Primordial, as she is very famous in the East. He tells him that he sensed her Demon Lord Haki very recently. The leader immediately realizes that a lower-ranked demon would never address such high-ranking demons as Rouge and Blanc. Thus, he realizes the situation he is in. Although Diablo expresses his desire to play with him a little more, the leader begs for mercy. Meanwhile, Sar and Glenda still don't understand anything and still want to fight Diablo. Diablo asks Sar if he is going to run away. In response, Sar draws his sword.
僕の名はサーレ。
We don't care. Let me tell you, we don't care.
Sar then questions Diablo about his true identity, but Diablo introduces himself as Rimuru's loyal butler. Meanwhile, Sar thinks Diablo doesn't want to reveal his identity. Thus, Sar launches himself at Diablo. Sar also implies, why should they be scared when Diablo only called Rouge and Blanc by their names? Sar also implies that he will expose Diablo's true identity with his raw skill. But then, Diablo reveals that he isn't an archdemon.
デーモンロードに進化を果たしています。
デーモンロード。
Sar also begins to sweat as he finally realizes the situation he is in. Sar then vents his frustration at Rimuru for naming someone as dangerous as Diablo. Meanwhile, Glenda, oblivious to the situation, proceeds to attack Diablo.
口ほどにもない。
Diablo then reveals that physical attacks have no effect on him. Sar then asks Glenda to buy some time, but
おい、グレンダ。
Sar still believes that he will be able to defeat Diablo if Grigori comes back. Sar launches multiple attacks on Diablo, but Diablo effortlessly nullifies all of his attacks. Sar finally understands that if Diablo wanted to, Diablo could easily eliminate him at any time. He also realizes the fact that a being stronger than Demon Lord Valentine would have no reason to eliminate the Archbishop. As Sar engages with Diablo, Ranga decides to take out the army that King Edward sent to capture Eom and the former king. Thus, Ranga confronts Grigori and others. Meanwhile, Grigori advises the general and his army to take care of Gobta and Gabiru. Grigori then decides to fight Ranga, but then Ranga begins taking out Edward's army. After that, Ranga charges at Grigori. As soon as Gobta arrives on the scene, He witnesses Ranga playing with Grigori, as if he is a toy. But Gobta and others manage to stop Ranga. On top of that, Ranga alone decimated Edward's army. As a result, Edward's army retreats.
Good night, girl. I'll see you tomorrow.
Then the Luminaries, or the 7 Days Clergy, arrive on the scene. The Luminaries then unleash a spell, not on Diablo, but on the reporters instead. Meanwhile, Diablo already understood that the Luminaries are trying to bury the evidence by eliminating the reporters. Just as Rimuru tries to heal Hinata, the Luminaries arrive at the scene. They imply that they are here to punish Hinata for violating their orders. However, Rimuru tells them not to get in his way while he tries to save Hinata. Meanwhile, Leonard tries to speak up against the 7 Days Clergy, but Gerald stabs him. Thus, he is exposed as one of the Luminaries. The Luminaries warn Rimuru against using force. Well, if he fights the Luminaries, then Lubelius might declare war on Tempest. Then, Rimuru receives a report from Diablo. Diablo reveals that the Luminaries are the ones who eliminated the Archbishop, and they are the masterminds behind this whole incident. Thus, Rimuru orders his subordinates to capture the Luminaries. Rimuru then exposes the Luminaries for eliminating the Archbishop. In response, they decide to erase the evidence. In other words, they plan to eliminate everyone, including Demon Lord Rimuru. They then put up a holy barrier and prepare to launch a powerful attack on all of them. Despite the barrier having resistance to all kinds of attacks from monsters, Shion manages to crack it. Thus, the Luminaries unleash a powerful attack on all of them. But Rimuru easily counters it using Beelzebub. By the way, Raphael had already made a copy of Beelzebub before sacrificing it to counter Hinata's final attack. Then, Raphael informs Rimuru that the main attack is incoming. This time, the Luminaries unleash the main attack on only Rimuru and Hinata. Even Rimuru realizes that Beelzebub is not powerful enough to counter the incoming attack. Thus, Raphael suggests using the ultimate skill, Uriel's absolute defense. Meanwhile, Rimuru wonders why Raphael sacrificed Beelzebub when they had Uriel's absolute defense. Confident in their victory, the Luminaries start mocking Rimuru, but to their surprise, Rimuru is unscathed. Needless to say, they are stunned. As Rimuru and his subordinates prepare to give the Luminaries a beating, the Luminaries begin to show their pathetic sides. They then try to escape. As soon as Rimuru gives Diablo the permission to eliminate the Luminaries, Diablo decides to act accordingly. As the Luminaries prepare to launch an attack on Diablo, Diablo promises to protect the reporters. In exchange, Diablo tells the reporters they must spread the truth behind the assassination of the Archbishop. In other words, the reporters need to tell the world that the 7 Days Clergy were the ones who eliminated the Archbishop. As a result, the reporters happily oblige. Diablo again promises to protect everyone, except King Edward. Diablo also grills Edward for mocking Rimuru. Diablo scares him so much that he begins to beg for his life. He even offers to give up the throne just to avoid death. Then Diablo tells him to give the throne to Eom. With no other choice, he decides to give the throne to Eom. Confident in victory, the Luminaries unleash Trinity Break on Diablo. In response, Diablo unleashes Despair Time. Thus, with a snap of his fingers, the world comes crumbling down on the Luminaries. Then, they get swallowed by the abyss. With that, Diablo claims a one-sided victory over the Luminaries. As the Luminaries try to escape, a gate appears right behind them. From that gate comes out none other than their god. Luminous immediately apologizes to Rimuru for the whole incident. Louis also announces the arrival of their goddess Luminous. Needless to say, the saints are speechless. Well, they didn't know that their god Luminous actually existed. On top of that, only a selected few knew about her existence and true identity. Meanwhile, Rimuru finds it ridiculous that a demon lord is worshipped as a god. Anyway, Luminous proceeds to heal Hinata and save her. Luminous then starts interrogating the Luminaries. After that, Luminous decides to punish the Luminaries. The Luminaries try to justify their actions, but Luminous isn't having any of that. With that, Luminous eliminates the Luminaries. Rimuru then suggests holding a meeting to discuss the future of Tempest and Lubelius. As Rimuru and others make their way to Tempest, Veldora comes to greet Rimuru. Meanwhile, Luminous is already angry at the sight of that evil dragon. Oblivious to the situation, Veldora accidentally reveals Luminous's true identity in front of everyone. Meanwhile, the Saints are dumbfounded. This prompts Luminous to take matters into her own hands. Thus, she vents her frustration on Veldora. Meanwhile, Rimuru decides to stay out of it. Well, let's face it, Luminous being angry at Veldora is justified, since Veldora was the one who went on a rampage and destroyed her territory. Meanwhile, the Saints are speechless about how Luminous is just bullying Veldora. By the way, this is a comical scenario, and if Veldora decided to fight back, that would have been a different story. After a while, Luminous, Hinata, and Rimuru hold a meeting to discuss future plans. During their conversation, Hinata reveals to Rimuru how she was tricked by Eastern merchants into eliminating Rimuru. Meanwhile, while recalling the incident, Rimuru subconsciously starts releasing his Demon Lord Haki. But Luminous stops him. While discussing the Eastern merchants, Yuki's name comes up. However, Rimuru implies that Yuki is probably innocent. By the way, Rimuru still thinks Yuki is a good guy. On the other hand, Hinata refuses to rule out the possibility of Yuki being involved. Since the loss of Hinata and the Saints would create panic, Rimuru tells them to pretend that his duel with Hinata ended in a draw. That there have been a handful of times when a human defeated a demon lord. Well, she believes that such a lie could potentially damage Rimuru's reputation as a demon lord. Leonard also agrees and tells Rimuru that others might look down on him despite him being a demon lord. Regardless, Rimuru decides to go ahead with this rumor. As per Rimuru's suggestion, Luminous decides to recognize Tempest as a nation and form diplomatic relations with it. In exchange, Rimuru promises to build a Luminism church in Tempest. After that, Rimuru also invites all of them to a feast. Shion gives Rimuru a hint about what she will do during the founding festival. Meanwhile, Veldora wants to run a takoyaki shop during the festival. But Rimuru decides to ignore all that. Rimuru then goes to Ingratia with Shuna to hire a patissier named Yoshida. After some back and forth, they manage to convince him. After that, Rimuru goes to the Kingdom of Blumund to meet Mayormile. As Rimuru tells Mayormile about their upcoming festival, Mayormile immediately becomes interested. Rimuru suggests setting up a storefront offering hamburgers, fries, etc. Rimuru also requests him to send 5 employees. Upon inquiry, Mayormile learns that Veldora wants to open a takoyaki shop at their upcoming festival, and Rimuru wants Mayormile's employees to help Veldora. Needless to say, Mayormile immediately starts sweating upon hearing the name Veldora. Initially hesitant, Rimuru manages to convince him to send his employees. After that, they also discuss the upcoming tournament. Rimuru also implies that he needs Mayormile's help to ensure the success of the founding festival. With that being said, Mayormile becomes very motivated. If the festival turns out to be a success, Rimuru suggests that he should consider relocating to Tempest. Rimuru also assures Mayormile that he will be appointed as the head of either the Trade or Public Relations Department in Tempest. After giving it some thought, Mayormile decides to serve Rimuru. After that, Rimuru also goes to meet Fuse and invite him to the festival. Rimuru also decides to invite Yuki. Well, according to Fuse, Yuki apparently tried to negotiate with the Western Church during Rimuru and Hinata's clash. Yeah, sure. Anyway, Rimuru also informs Fuse that Milim will also attend the festival. King Gazelle holds a meeting regarding the current situation and Rimuru becoming a demon lord. Jane implies that Rimuru has grown stronger than King Gazelle himself. She further adds that Rimuru is a threat. However, King Gazelle dismisses all this. He assures everyone that he knows what kind of man Rimuru is. In other words, he believes that Rimuru will never betray him. He also receives an invitation letter from Rimuru for the upcoming founding festival. Meanwhile, Errol reports back to the Empress of Sarion, Elmesia. Errol then delivers the invitation from Rimuru. During the conversation, we learn that Elmesia is quite jealous that Errol got to visit an interesting place such as Tempest. As the conversation progresses, we also learn that Elmesia loves desserts and cakes. To avoid missing out on an opportunity to try new foods, Elmesia decides to visit Tempest during the founding festival. Soon after returning from the Kingdom of Bloomond, Rimuru spots Ramirez and company. He also notices a small hut they were building. Upon inquiry, Beretta explains the situation. It turns out that Ramirez has decided to close her old labyrinth and move to Tempest, mainly to alleviate her boredom. This decision initially infuriates Rimuru, but Ramirez, with her carefree attitude, manages to calm him down. With that being said, Rimuru holds a meeting with Ramirez and others. Rimuru instructs one of the goblins to build a door inside the evacuation area. As Rimuru hints at building a labyrinth with the help of Ramirez, she immediately becomes happy. He also decides to place monsters inside the labyrinth and have adventurers fight them. Rimuru also promises to compensate her for managing the labyrinth. Needless to say, the thought of making money makes Ramirez drool. Rimuru implies that even he is surprised by how quickly they managed to build the arena. Well, Sophia and Albus decided to help Rimuru build the arena. That's why they were able to construct it so swiftly. Meanwhile, Ramirez has already managed to build several floors inside the labyrinth. By the way, Ramirez's skill, Mazecraft, allows her to transport a vast space into her labyrinth. Rimuru decides to construct 100 floors inside the labyrinth. He also mentions that he wants the monsters inside the labyrinth to become stronger as they descend. In response, Ramirez questions where they will find that many monsters. As a result, Rimuru tells Ramirez about his plan and how he intends to populate the labyrinth with monsters. As soon as Rimuru explains his plan, Ramirez becomes very excited about building 100 floors. Meanwhile, after meeting Kurobe, Rimuru realizes that they have a lot of high-quality weapons lying around. Thus, Rimuru decides to place those weapons inside the dungeon's treasure chests. Kurobe also provides Rimuru with a brand new sword. By the way, this sword is special as it will evolve into a legendary class item with Rimuru's growth as a demon lord. After a while, Rimuru visits Veldora. Rimuru reveals that he intends to provide Veldora with a den. Needless to say, he immediately becomes interested. Rimuru then tells Veldora about Ramirez's labyrinth. He also implies that they need to make the labyrinth interesting. Thus, he suggests that they should have an overlord who rules over the labyrinth. In other words, Veldora will be the final boss and the overlord of the labyrinth. Needless to say, Veldora is very excited about it, although hardly anyone would ever reach the 100th floor. According to Rimuru's suggestion, Veldora decides to become the final boss. Rimuru also tells Veldora that he can unleash his aura inside the labyrinth. Thus, Veldora finally unleashes his massive aura. By the way, once he unleashes his aura, the labyrinth will be filled with high-density magicules, thus giving rise to numerous monsters inside the labyrinth. Rimuru also provides a room for Veldora. Rimuru then suggests having different environments on different floors, but Ramirez tells Rimuru that she will not be able to do that. But then Milim interrupts their conversation and tells Rimuru that they should capture fire dragons and ice dragons to create different environments inside the labyrinth. Needless to say, Rimuru is surprised to see her. During their conversation, Milim learns that Ramirez is living with Rimuru. This makes Milim jealous, thus leading to chaos inside the room. But Shuna manages to stop them by using a cake. After a while, Rimuru decides to use Ramirez's special skill, the power of resurrection, to keep the adventurers safe. In other words, if an adventurer dies inside the labyrinth, he will be resurrected. For that, Ramirez decides to use a bracelet called the Resurrection Bracelet. Ramirez also informs Rimuru that she has already tested the bracelet on Beretta. Needless to say, Rimuru is angry. Anyway, they continue to discuss more regarding the structure of the labyrinth. After discussing for a while, Milim decides to capture some dragons for the Labyrinth. After a while, Rimuru holds a meeting. Since representatives of all species living in the Jura forest have started visiting Tempest, Rigard suggests that they are probably here to witness Rimuru's power or to swear loyalty to him. Thus, Rimuru gets ready to have a formal audience for them. As a result, Rimuru reluctantly gets dressed. Not gonna lie, Rimuru looks kinda cute with that tiny crown. Needless to say, Rimuru is embarrassed. Then, he starts greeting different species. Gabiru's father also visits Rimuru to congratulate him. Rimuru continues to meet and greet different species. After a while, two of the most powerful species in the Jura forest start fighting over whom Rimuru should ally with. By the way, these two races have been at war for a long time. To stop them, Rimuru releases his Demon Lord Haki, but they are so angry at each other that they couldn't sense Rimuru's Haki. Rigard then tries to stop them, but they start to mock Rigard. Then, something or someone breaks through Shuna's barrier. Needless to say, everyone immediately realizes that someone with immense energy just entered Tempest. Funnily enough, those two, despite being unfazed by Rimuru's Haki, start to tremble after sensing the energy from that unknown Majin. As soon as Rimuru and others arrive at the scene, they witness three individuals wreaking havoc in Tempest. One of them implies that he should have been the one to defeat Clayman and steal his throne, but Rimuru got in his way. Just as Rimuru is about to step in, Shion stops him. Shion tells him that she will handle those three. After hearing their conversation, Rimuru realizes that those three are brothers. He also implies that each of them has as much energy as Clayman did before he awakened. He also realizes that their father must be a demon lord. With that being said, Shion decides to take on all three of them. Needless to say, they start to mock Shion for trying to take on all three of them alone. Thus, Shion takes them to the arena. Shion implies that she will show them that having greater energy doesn't decide the outcome of a battle. Shion completely decimates those three as if they are mere small fries. Needless to say, it is a one-sided beatdown. Surprisingly, she finishes all three of them in a matter of seconds. Even Rimuru is surprised. Anyway, after inquiring, Rimuru learns that they are the sons of the Demon Lord de Gruel. By the way, de Gruel sent those three to train under Rimuru. They are lucky that they didn't encounter Diablo, or else they would have been traumatized. Anyway, after some back and forth, Shion decides to train them. Tengu, the most powerful species inside the Jura forest, finally visits Rimuru. By the way, Kaede, the ruler of the Tengu race, sent her daughter Momiji to represent the Tengu race. Then, we can see a flashback of Benimaru and Albus visiting the Tengu village. After that, Benimaru and Albus meet Momiji. Momiji asks if Demon Lord Rimuru wants to take over their land, but Benimaru clarifies they don't want to do that. Instead, Rimuru wants their permission to build a tunnel through their mountain. As they are talking about the mountain, Momiji gets angry and calls Albus a smelly snake. As a result, they get into a fight. As they continue to fight, Benimaru realizes the situation has taken a turn for the worse. But just as Momiji is about to land a lethal hit, Benimaru stops her. Benimaru tells Momiji that she failed to control her powers. On the other hand, he tells Albus that Momiji's attack would have sliced her in two if he hadn't stopped her. This leaves both Momiji and Albus devastated. Rimuru introduces Mayor Miles to everyone. He also informs them that if the founding festival is a success, he will appoint Mayor Miles as their chief financial manager. Mayor Miles then shares the details about the schedule for the founding festival. After that, Veldora informs Rimuru that the forest Luminaries placed inside the 95th floor has started growing for some reason. As a result, it has covered almost 20 floors. Since the forest started absorbing the Magicules, no boss-level monsters were born. Thus, Veldora tells Rimuru that he wants to employ some worthy boss-level monsters for those floors. He also needs someone who would clean the forest. In response, Ranga tells Rimuru that he has a suitable candidate. He then brings out the fox spirit they freed from Clayman. The cute fox tells Rimuru that she is good at cleaning forests. As a result, Rimuru agrees to make her a boss monster for the 90th floor. Being a naming machine, Rimuru immediately gives her a name. He names her Kumara. By the way, Kumara will trick Rimuru into naming her multiple times. Anyway, Shuna and Trainee also provide some good candidates who are suitable to become boss-level monsters. As they continue their meeting, Soye suddenly informs Rimuru that Viscount Kazal, the slave trader, has been arrested. Soye also informs them that the infamous slave trader group named Orthrus was destroyed by the Lightspeed hero Masayuki. Thus, enters Masayuki, the luckiest guy in Tensura. If you think only Rimuru has plot armor, you would be wrong. Well, Masayuki is your typical isekai protagonist with incredible luck. Not only was he reincarnated as a chosen hero, but he also has a special skill that makes people support him. You could say it's a kind of hypnotism. On top of that, Masayuki got reincarnated because of the best girl in Tensura. His luck and special skills also helped him defeat powerful opponents without lifting a finger. Since nobody ever saw him attacking anyone, people think he is super fast. As a result, he was named the Lightspeed hero. In reality, his opponents lost because of his luck. By the way, Masayuki is aware of the fact that he is a coward and isn't powerful or anything. And everything is happening because of his luck. But what makes him so likable is that he isn't arrogant or a bad person. In fact, he is one of the nicest people in Tensura. By the way, he might be a joke character now, but he will play a huge role in the future. Since people think he took down Orthrus, he was tasked with returning the elves who were illegally captured as slaves to the Jura forest. As the news of Masayuki heading to Tempest spreads, people start to think Masayuki is going to Tempest to slay Demon Lord Rimuru. In reality, Masayuki just wants to talk to Rimuru. His team members, Bernie and Jiu, implies that if Masayuki gets serious, even a Demon Lord is no match for him. As the guests for the upcoming festival arrive in Tempest, Rimuru starts meeting representatives from different countries. He meets the King of Blumend, King Gazelle, Yom, and others. He also discusses his future plans with them. After that, Rimuru heads to Ingracia to meet Yuki and the kids. By the way, Rimuru is still oblivious to the fact that Yuki is his enemy. After a while, Rimuru also meets his students. As soon as he reveals that he is inviting them to a big festival in his nation, all of them become very excited. Rimuru also invites Tis Sensei. After that, the kids get ready to visit Tempest. After a while, Rimuru takes all of them, including Yuki, to Tempest. After a while, Masayuki finally reaches Tempest. As soon as Team Lightspeed spot Rimuru, Jinrai starts disrespecting him. Meanwhile, Bernie suggests that they should settle the score right there. Jiwoo also arrogantly declares that a Demon Lord is no match for Masayuki. It goes without saying, Shion is furious, but Rimuru stops her. In response to their rudeness, Rimuru thanks Masayuki for bringing the elves back. He also offers them a house to stay. Bernie and the others continue to mock Rimuru, while Masayuki tries to stop them, but it is useless. Surprisingly, Yuki steps in to defend Rimuru. He implies that Rimuru truly wishes to coexist with humans. Even then, their idiocy continues. They try their hardest to challenge Rimuru. With no other choice, Rimuru tells them that he will fight Masayuki if they manage to win the tournament they will be holding the next day. Meanwhile, Masayuki reluctantly accepts Rimuru's proposal. Rimuru holds a feast for his guests from different countries. Then he introduces himself to everyone present. He also tells them to set aside the difficult topics and enjoy the food. As they are eating, Hakuro and others bring in a monstrous fish. Meanwhile, Rimuru gets all excited when he sees the fish, but the guests don't even bother to look at it. Well, they're a bit skeptical since they've never tried that kind of fish before. Plus, they're supposed to eat the fish or the sushi raw, which makes them even more hesitant. With no other choice, Rimuru takes the initiative to take the first bite. Then, Hinata also joins him to eat sushi. She decides to eat sushi without wasabi. After that, Yuki also joins them, making fun of Hinata for not using wasabi. With that being said, one by one, everyone begins to eat sushi. As they are enjoying the food, two soldiers barge in and inform everyone that the Empress of the Dynasty of Sarion, Elmacia, is setting foot in Tempest. Meanwhile, Rimuru thinks it's not a big deal that the Empress herself is visiting them. But then Gazelle fills him in. He reveals that the Heavenly Empress Elmacia leaving Carrion is a big deal. Well, the dynasty of Carrion is a large nation, and Empress Elmacia is regarded as a descendant of God. It goes without saying that Elmacia barely leaves her homeland. On top of that, Elmacia is so powerful that she has proclaimed herself as the Heavenly Empress. Being a high elf, Elmacia is almost 2,000 years old, and a mere human could never dream of having a chance to meet her. With that being said, Elmacia enters the room, but as soon as Rimuru greets her, well, it happened due to the heroic haki that Elmacia is emitting. As a result, Rimuru realizes that Elmacia is not someone to be messed with. She also tells Rimuru that she wants to have a private conversation with him later on. After that, Gazelle praises Rimuru for standing his ground against Elmacia.
Man, it's getting hot in here.
Whoa. Hey.
Milim, Frey, and Carrion finally arrive in Tempest. Upon meeting Milim, Rimuru asks if Frey got angry at Milim for visiting Tempest without telling her. In response, Milim implies that she managed to deceive Frey this time. But then Milim's cover gets blown. As a result, Frey walks up to Rimuru and tells him that they couldn't find any good formal wear for Milim as she was missing for a while. In response, Rimuru tells her to enjoy herself while they are in Tempest. Then Rimuru, by a slip of the tongue, says something that makes Frey think he just compared them to mere livestock. In other words, Frey thinks Rimuru called them birds.
Tori?
Meanwhile, Carrion starts laughing. Rimuru then apologizes for accidentally disrespecting the Harpies. In response, Frey implies that she was testing Rimuru to determine whether his presence would help Milim grow into a mature person or not. But in the end, Carrion becomes a sacrifice. On the first day of the festival, Rimuru gives a speech. Initially, Rimuru addresses the crowd in his slime form. He starts his speech by thanking everyone for coming to Tempest. He tells them he wants to build a nation where everyone can live in harmony. He also mentions that he wants to build trust and establish friendly relations with several nations. He clarifies that he doesn't want to wage war on any nation just because they don't want to cooperate with them. However, he also warns that if anyone tries to push unfair treatment on them or wage war just because they are monsters, they won't show any mercy. Then Rimuru finally takes his human form. Meanwhile, the kids and Tis Sensei couldn't believe that Rimuru Sensei was a demon lord and a ruler of a nation. Maribel Rosso can also be spotted among the crowd. Tis Sensei was so shocked that she passed out. As soon as Kei spots Hinata, he almost calls her old lady and instantly regrets it. After learning Hinata was Shizu's student, and she is the famous Hinata Sakaguchi, the kids quickly become friendly to her. With Tis Sensei passed out, Rimuru puts Hinata in charge of the kids. For those who say Slime Season 3 is boring, I can clearly see two big reasons to watch it. With representatives from different countries present, the theater performances finally kick off. They start with an orchestra featuring artists from different races. Needless to say, the orchestra leaves the audience absolutely speechless. As soon as the orchestra wraps up, Shuna and Shion take the stage. Then, Shuna and Shion start their performance. I never imagined seeing someone like Shion play a violin, but here we are. To be honest, Shuna looks amazing, and of course, Shion too. Their performance was so captivating that even Luminous is mesmerized. After a while, Rimuru comes across Hinata. As Rimuru calls her out for having too much fun, she immediately tries to draw her sword. Bro, this girl is so annoying. Anyway, she informs Rimuru that Luminous is waiting for him. As soon as Rimuru meets Luminous, she tells him that they have a non-aggression treaty, but that's not enough. Well, she wants to have cultural exchanges as well. After witnessing Shuna and Shion's performance, Luminous becomes very impressed with Tempest's culture, thus leading to her decision to have cultural exchanges. Although Rimuru seemed interested, Luminous offers to give Rimuru a skill in exchange. By the way, this skill will allow Rimuru's faithful followers to borrow some of his power. With that being said, Rimuru accepts her offer. Thus, he receives a skill from Luminous.
進行と音調の費用を理解しました。
Then, Luminous points out that she spotted some rather shady individuals that Rimuru invited. In other words, she is talking about Yuki and Mariabelle. It turns out that Rimuru is somewhat aware of Yuki and Mariabelle being their enemies, and I was wrong. Meyer Miles informs Rimuru that although they have a lot of funds, they have run out of money to pay the tradesmen. Meanwhile, most tradesmen are demanding to be paid in cash. Well, they have assets, but they have run out of usable gold coins. After listening to the conversation, Diablo concludes that someone might be scheming behind the scenes to ruin Tempest's reputation. According to West Nation's law, the tradesmen insist that they should be paid with gold coins. Furthermore, if they use force, then the Western Council might not consider Tempest as their ally, thus damaging their reputation even more. Surprisingly, Shion points out that since Rimuru already plans to join hands with Sarion, Blumend, Dwargon, Milim's domain, and Falmouth, the Western nations would face a bigger loss by ignoring Tempest's presence. Diablo also praises Shion for that valuable insight. Needless to say, Rimuru couldn't believe that Shion came up with something valuable. According to Diablo and others, the Western Council is worried that Tempest's increasing power might threaten the Council's position. Meanwhile, Diablo gets fired up to destroy the Western Council. Needless to say, Shion also follows suit.
そういうのは却下で。
With that being said, Rimuru decides to make the tradesmen play by their rules. With Shoka as the host, the tournament finally kicks off. Shoka informs the audience that Diablo, Benimaru, and Shion are the three strongest executives of Rimuru, and the winner of the tournament will be able to join Diablo, Benimaru, and Shion, becoming the last member of the Big Four. It turns out Rimuru came up with the Big Four gimmick to prevent Diablo, Benimaru, and Shion from joining the tournament.
四天王なんと甘美な響き。
Well, Rimuru believes that those three would decimate everyone if they entered the tournament. Rimuru also implies that he plans to give the last seat of the Big Four to the one who can expose the hero Masayuki's true power and win the tournament. Thus, he somehow manages to deceive them with this pretense. However, the Big Four thingy accidentally turns into a big deal. As Masayuki enters the arena, everyone starts cheering for him. Meanwhile, Rimuru wonders how Masayuki won the qualifying rounds without showing his skills. In response, Sue informs Rimuru that he wasn't able to gauge his strength either, as Masayuki's party member Jinrai took down all the other opponents on his behalf. Soka continues to introduce all the competitors one by one. I can't say this guy's name, it literally sounds like gay. Next we have Boyx and Equix. We also have a mysterious masked man. I think it is quite obvious who he is. Yes, it is none other than Carrion. Meanwhile, Rimuru realizes that it is all Milim's work. We also have Rimuru's best subordinate, Gobta. As for the last competitor, we have Geld. After that, Rimuru addresses the competitors. He tells them that if they manage to win the tournament, they will be given a chance to be a part of Rimuru's Big Four, or they can also challenge Rimuru. Upon looking at the match lineup, Rimuru realizes that the matches seem too convenient for hero Masayuki. Rimuru also starts to wonder if Masayuki manipulated destiny or something. Anyway, the first match is between the longtime rivals, Boyx and Equix. Long story short, the fight was intense, but Boyx somehow managed to win. The second match is between Masayuki and Jinrai. To no one's surprise, Jinrai forfeits the match, thus Masayuki wins by default. Moving on to the next match, Gobta faces the swordsman named Gay. That guy brazenly challenges Rimuru and even starts disrespecting him, and that too in front of Diablo. Meanwhile, Diablo immediately gets triggered and almost steps in to destroy that guy. Well, we all know what might happen to that guy after this match. Anyway, the match begins. Initially, Gobta only dodges G's attacks and continues to run. Meanwhile, Shion wonders if that guy is trying to bully Gobta. But Sue reveals that Gobta is observing his opponent's attacks very carefully and dodging them. Rimuru manages to bait Gobta by telling him that if he wins, he will give Gobta the fishing rod he always wanted. Thus, Gobta decides to show his trump card. Gobta uses his summon ability and accidentally ends up summoning Ranga. Thus, Gobta manages to win. The fourth match begins with Geld facing Lion Mask, aka Carrion. Both sides clash with Carrion on the offensive and Geld on the defensive. Geld continues to defend himself against Carrion's attacks. As they clash, the kids become very impressed by their fight. Meanwhile, Carrion compliments Geld for withstanding his attacks. At the same time, Carrion questions why Geld isn't using any of his skills, to which Geld answers that it is because Carrion hasn't gone all out yet. As a result, Carrion decides to use one of his most powerful attacks against Geld. With that, Carrion wins the match. Bro, did they nerf Geld or something? I mean, I know that Geld cannot defeat Carrion, but he should be able to do more than that. Meanwhile, Tis Sensei starts crying from happiness after Carrion wins the match. The fifth match begins with Masayuki facing Boyix, but things take a hilarious turn when Masayuki decides to talk his way out of the match. He starts off by praising Boyix's last match. Masayuki implies that since Boyix used the majority of his power in his last match, he will easily win against Boyix. Masayuki further adds that he wanted to fight Boyix in his peak shape. He then offers to face Boyix inside the Labyrinth soon. As you might have guessed, Boyix agrees, and once again, Masayuki's luck helps him win the match without any fight. Meanwhile, people think Masayuki is so merciful. As usual, everyone starts cheering for him. Rimuru realizes that this is probably the work of a hero's charisma or something.
Bro reached the final without literally doing anything.
Zoom, 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 zoom. I'm zooming in my room. My zoom is off forever.
Moving on to the final fight of the evening, Gobta faces Lion Mask, aka Carrion. Gobta again reminds Rimuru that he must give him the new fishing rod as he promised. Carrion tells Gobta to forfeit the match to avoid getting hurt, but Gobta confidently gets ready to fight Carrion. Right off the bat, Gobta and Ranga charge toward Carrion. In response, Carrion unleashes multiple attacks. As Gobta continues to dodge Carrion's attacks, Ranga decides to attack Carrion. This leads Carrion to unleash another series of attacks. Knowing that he couldn't win against Carrion, Gobta decides to use underhanded tactics and destroys part of Carrion's mask. Now, Carrion can't use both of his hands, as it will risk his identity being revealed. On the other hand, Gobta decides to attack Carrion. The audience immediately calls Gobta out for using such tactics. But Gobta implies, as Rimuru once said, that in this world, winning is all that counts. Fearing that his identity might get leaked, Carrion decides to give Gobta the win. Thus, Gobta wins and heads to the final to face Masayuki. Rimuru calls King Gazelle to ask for some gold coins. Elmesia also enters the room to help out Rimuru. Elmesia implies that if Rimuru promises to invite her to their future events, she would be more than happy to help them out. Needless to say, Rimuru agrees. Thus, she gives Rimuru some gold coins. Immediately after entering the room, Elmesia spots Diablo. After that, Elmesia speculates that someone would have offered their help if Rimuru couldn't prepare the coins in time. Since intimidation and other tactics probably wouldn't work on Tempest, they decided to have them owe Rimuru a favor. Diablo further adds that someone from the Western Council would have swooped in at the last minute to mediate for them. In that way, they would solve the problem they created, which will create an obligation for Tempest. Meyer Miles then confirms that he heard rumors of a committee that controls the Western nations from Shadow. Elmesia then proceeds to ask a question. She implies that she wants to make a pact with Tempest, but before that, she wants to make a few things clear. She then asks Rimuru how he plans to deal with Diablo. In response, Rimuru says Diablo is strong, but he does his work properly, and he doesn't think Diablo is that dangerous. But then, Elmesia reiterates to Rimuru how he intends to deal with Diablo when he goes berserk. To Elmesia's surprise, Rimuru tells her that he will stop him before that happens, and he will also take responsibility. This statement leaves Elmesia stunned. Well, Rimuru just casually promised Elmesia to keep one of the most powerful and extremely dangerous beings in check as if it were nothing. Meanwhile, Rimuru still has no clue about Diablo's true identity. She also implies that Rimuru is truly a piece of work. After a while, the final match of the tournament starts with Gobta facing Masayuki. Gobta decides to face Masayuki with the hope of getting the new fishing rod. Meanwhile, Masayuki is scared to death, and he also starts to look for ways to survive this match. Masayuki wonders whether his powers will work this time or not. Masayuki is so scared that he almost passes out. Meanwhile, Gobta thinks Masayuki is unfazed, and that getting closer to him carelessly could cost him the match. With no other choice, Gobta decides to use his ultimate power. Thus, he summons Ranga, and then fuses himself with Ranga, creating the Gobta-Ranga Fusion. Meanwhile, Milim, who was getting bored, finally becomes excited after seeing Gobta's new form. Meanwhile, Masayuki starts panicking, and he also starts to think that he might die. Just as Masayuki is about to say he forfeits the match, Gobta and Ranga charge towards him. As a result, Hakuro and Milim get angry at Gobta for his blunder. As usual, the crowd thinks Masayuki used some kind of lightning-fast attack to win the match. Before Soka could announce the winner, Masayuki declares that he has lost the match and walks out of the arena. Meanwhile, the crowd thinks that Masayuki is giving Demon Lord Rimuru a chance to correct his ways. In reality, he doesn't want to face a Demon Lord. Immediately after Gobta embarrasses himself in front of the crowd, Milim gets so angry that she decides to train Gobta herself. Meanwhile, Rimuru decides to invite Masayuki for lunch once the tournament is over. Anyway, with Masayuki's withdrawal, Gobta becomes the winner of the tournament. Needless to say, Gobta couldn't believe that he won. As Rimuru declares that Gobta has officially become a member of the Big Four, Gobta becomes very happy. Meanwhile, Rimuru knows that Gobta is doomed. As soon as Rimuru gives Gobta his award, Milim takes Gobta away by force. She assures Rimuru that she will train Gobta inside the labyrinth, so even if he dies, he will be all right. Kuro also tells Gobta to do his best. Although Ranga tries to abandon Gobta, Milim takes him away as well. Not gonna lie, bro is cooked. Rimuru also implies that he will forever remember their bravery. After a while, Masayuki decides to accept Rimuru's invitation and have lunch with him. Both of them introduce themselves to each other. During their conversation, Masayuki learns that Rimuru is Japanese. As Rimuru suggests they talk while eating, Masayuki wonders if this will be his last meal. But Rimuru assures him that he wants to get along with him. While eating Japanese food after a long time, Masayuki starts crying from happiness. After Masayuki finishes eating, he tells Rimuru that he would be happy to be his servant. He also implies that he doesn't care about his status as a hero. He comes clean about his unique skill, Chosen One, and everything related to it. Rimuru then requests him to advertise the dungeon. Since there is no risk of dying, Masayuki agrees to advertise the dungeon. While discussing entertainment and other topics, Masayuki asks Rimuru if he has manga. Rimuru's vision about entertainment moves Masayuki so much that he expresses his desire to follow Rimuru wherever he goes. Thus, Rimuru gains a new friend. The final event of the Founding Festival begins with Soka introducing their labyrinth. She then introduces the challengers one by one. First, we have an overly idiotic team, Then we have Erin's team. And lastly, we have Masayuki's team. As Soka is about to open the labyrinth to challengers, that guy named Gay enters the arena.
I'm gay.
Superhero landing!
He blames Rimuru's subordinates for playing dirty in his defeat. He then proceeds to disrespect Rimuru again. Bro seriously has a death wish or something. Shion immediately decides to deal with him. But he is spared due to Rimuru's order. Soka also provides the challengers with 4 dryads who manage the labyrinth. She then introduces Ramirez's resurrection bracelet, explaining that it will resurrect those who die inside the labyrinth, but it will only work within the labyrinth. Meanwhile, people are skeptical about whether the bracelet will work or not. It goes without saying that Gay also tells them in a condescending tone that there is no way the bracelet works. He then decides to use Mayor Miles as a scapegoat and tells him to prove that the bracelet works. Since Mayor Miles has already experienced the resurrection bracelet once, he happily obliges. But as soon as they enter the labyrinth, Gay ruthlessly attacks Mayor Miles in the name of testing the bracelet. Bro is really pushing his luck. Although Mayor Miles safely resurrects, Rimuru becomes very angry at Gay. After a while, the challengers enter Rimuru's new labyrinth. As soon as the labyrinth exploration begins, the idiotic team falls into a trapdoor. Meanwhile, Rimuru questions Ramirez as to why there are trapdoors on the first floor. Well, Ramirez messed with the labyrinth without Rimuru's permission. As a result, Rimuru scolds Ramirez. As Erin's team easily clears obstacles and floors, Rimuru gets suspicious. Upon interrogating Ramirez, he learns that Ramirez was bribed by Erin using a cake. Meanwhile, Masayuki's team has already cleared 3 floors. Needless to say, Rimuru is stunned. On the other hand, Gay also clears the floor with insane speed, which leads Rimuru to believe Gay is using magic or something. But Raphael tells him that Gay is using elemental magic, auto-map. As Gay gets treasure chests one after another, Rimuru wonders how he is doing that. Even Raphael doesn't have an answer. This leads Rimuru to believe that Gay is doing something shady. Meanwhile, Veldora is rehearsing to intimidate the adventurers once they arrive on the 100th floor. The idiotic team dies and resurrects. But they decide to challenge the labyrinth once again. Then, Erin's team decides to withdraw after getting a rare item. Meanwhile, Masayuki's team clears the 10th floor and withdraws. Immediately after Masayuki's team clears the 10th floor, Gay also reaches the 10th floor. Since the boss monster was defeated a few minutes ago, Gay has to wait for almost 30 minutes. He then demands that the dryad accompanying him must resurrect the boss monster immediately. However, she informs him that the boss monster will resurrect in 15 minutes. Gay then implies that there is no need for him to follow the rules set by them. He then proceeds to attack her, thus violating the rule. She uses vines to bind him and removes the pain reduction effect. The dryad gives him a final warning, questioning if he is willing to apologize. Meanwhile, the audience is speechless. They couldn't believe that she eliminated Gay, an A rank, with a single hit. Well, a dryad is already above A rank since birth. Meanwhile, Gay is frustrated. Then Rimuru declares that those who make their way to the 100th floor will be given an opportunity to face Rimuru himself. In reality, no one would ever reach the 100th floor. Once the tournament is over, Rimuru holds a big feast for everyone. As per the discussion with Rimuru, Mayor Miles decides to act as if Tempest doesn't have dwarven gold coins to pay the traders. Duke Muse then interrupts their conversation and implies that he doubts that even a nation of monsters would default on their debts to any of them present. But then Duke Muse also demands that Mayor Miles provide the traders' payment in gold coins. Then Rimuru enters the room. Muse tells Rimuru that traders are worried that they won't get paid, and they asked him to mediate on this issue. Muse tells Mayor Miles that any trader would trust only dwarven gold coins. He then offers to help Rimuru by lending gold coins to Tempest. As Diablo and El Macia had suspected, someone, in this case Muse, is indeed conspiring with Grand Bell Rosso in an attempt to win Rimuru's trust. Muse offers to help Rimuru, but Rimuru rejects his offer. Then Geld brings in the gold coins that Gazelle and Elmesia lent Rimuru. Needless to say, Muse is stunned, and even questions their authenticity. This leads Benimaru and others to get triggered. Rimuru then encourages them to appraise the coins if they want. Then Shuna brings in some reporters. Upon confirming that those coins are real, they proceed with the payment. Once the traders are paid, Muse questions how they managed to collect that many gold coins. Meanwhile, one of the traders implies that as long as Tempest respects international law, they will continue doing business with Tempest, but Rimuru straight up rejects their offer. In other words, Rimuru doesn't want to do business with them in the future. Rimuru's declaration sends the traders into a state of panic. He then implies that they were the ones who said a nation of monsters cannot be trusted, and he doesn't want to do business with those who cannot be trusted. Rimuru also revokes their rights to do business in Tempest. Even that didn't stop Muse from calling Rimuru a tyrant. Well, they are lucky that they are not dealing with other demon lords. Although Muse tells Rimuru that they were just following international law, Rimuru tells him Tempest isn't a part of the Western Council, and even if Tempest can't join the Council, it won't matter to them. After all, they will be building their own new economic bloc. Muse then implies that Tempest should join the Council, and he even offers to do the bidding for them. But Rimuru tells him that he will lose their footing since the reporters will be writing reports about how a noble swoops in uniting the traders to demand gold coins. With that being said, Rimuru completely destroyed Muse and his plans. After a while, a completely defeated Muse realizes that Demon Lord Rimuru wasn't someone he was able to do anything against. Meanwhile, Mariabelle and Granbelle realize that Muse has failed, and they also imply that they should have destroyed Tempest when they had the chance. Mariabelle also tells Granbelle that the world belongs to Rossos. Yes, the world in your head belongs to you, so keep on dreaming. After a while, Rimuru decides to hold a meeting to discuss his future plans. He starts the meeting by thanking Elmesia for giving him a heads up about the shady traders. Rimuru also wonders if the mastermind will show up or not. Since Duke Muse was a pawn, Rimuru speculates that they might send in someone higher up. With that being said, Rimuru starts the meeting. Immediately after Rimuru starts his meeting, King Gazelle questions Rimuru about the large projector displayed at the arena. Although Rimuru thinks it is good for entertainment, Gazelle tells him that transmitting accurate images over long distances could change how wars are waged. Meanwhile, Eren calls Elmesia Elchan, which leads Erald to get angry, but Elmesia tells him to shut up. Elmesia then expresses her desire to bring some of Tempest's technology to her nation. On top of that, she also wants a piece of Rimuru's new Magitrain. Rimuru tells her that the Magitrain is yet to be developed. Since the Magitrain will use elemental magic-driven reactors, Rimuru asks Elmesia to lend some of their sorceress science experts. Elmesia happily obliges and even offers some funding. On the other hand, Gazelle also offers some help in elemental engineering. Thus, Rimuru presents his plan to improve transportation between nations by using the Magitrain. Rimuru also decides to include Falmouth in their monster and man co-prosperity sphere. After that, Blumund offers to serve as a logistic hub and manage all the goods imported and exported by Magitrain.